Okay, how dare I ever question the intricacies and the art of John Lennon and the Beatles? If you happen to miss my last couple of TikToks, we were talking about the Beatles and how there is a theory that Paul McCartney is potentially not really Paul McCartney. The theory is that Paul McCartney of the Beatles passed away and was actually replaced by a lookalike. Now the plot absolutely thickens after having rented this. It was $2 to rent on YouTube and is claiming to be the last testament of George Harrison, explaining how Paul McCartney is, in fact, actually dead, and the great lengths that were gone to basically make this one of like the greatest cover-ups probably in history. So wow, I guess we're really going down a Beatles rabbit hole today. Strap in! Do you remember how crazy everyone went over One Direction? Well, that's basically what the Beatles were like for the 60s. They were mega famous, like everyone knew their names, they'd toured the world, they'd released 5 albums. It was like next level for this era. Like, I get emotional watching these for some reason, I don't know. Anyway, so to save you paying for and watching this entire thing, I've basically broken it down into like the most interesting parts that kind of like explains everything we've been talking about in the last few TikToks about the Beatles. Click on the playlist if you haven't watched those yet. I also sped it up for time. That's why the voice sounds a little bit funny.
I'm Joel Gilbert from Highway 61 Entertainment. On July 1st, 2005, we received an unsolicited package at our offices in Hollywood, California. There was no return address, but it was postmarked in London. Inside was a mini cassette player and 2 mini cassette tapes. The tapes were labeled The Last Testament of George Harrison. On the tapes was the voice of a man claiming to be Beatle George Harrison. He told an incredible story.
So the following is supposed to be The Last Testament of George Harrison.
On 9 November 1966, we began a recording session at Abbey Road Recording Studios around midnight. However, Paul became more and more agitated as he and John disagreed over song lyrics. After more heated words, Paul stormed out of the studio just before 5 a.m. I recall it was raining heavily as Paul drove off in his white Austin Healey. At about 6 a.m., John, Ringo and I gave up and exited the studio, still a bit shaken from Paul's row with John. Just then an official-looking black van pulled up in front of us. A man wearing an officer's uniform emerged and flashing a badge stated, "There's been a terrible accident involving Paul McCartney. You must come with us." He identified himself only as Maxwell. Maxwell explained he was dispatched from MI5, the British intelligence service, because it was a high-profile situation. Maxwell explained he was dispatched from MI5, the British intelligence service, because it was a high-profile situation. He said his officers were at the scene of a fatal accident involving a white Austin Healey, and that a woman named Rita was insisting the dead man was Paul McCartney. We were needed to verify if, in fact, the corpse was Paul McCartney. We were in absolute shock. I prayed this was only some cruel prank Paul was playing on us. We drove just 3 miles and exited the van where we saw a mangled white car. Maxwell pointed to a woman in a light blue dress sitting in the rain and crying hysterically. "That's Rita," he told us. "She claims she was walking on the pavement in the cold rain, and Paul McCartney offered her a lift. She accepted and quickly realized he was a Beatle and went into an hysterical fan frenzy, grabbing and hugging him and causing him to lose control of the vehicle, smashing into a lorry and flipping over. Rita says McCartney was trapped inside, but she managed to exit the vehicle to call for help. When she returned, the car had exploded and McCartney was decapitated. Maxwell led us to a draped body and slowly raised the cover. John was sobbing uncontrollably. What we saw was ghastly. It was a body with a decapitated head next to it in a pool of blood. We stood in disbelief at the horrific sight. The head was split open, had an eye missing, and the hair was burnt off. And there were no teeth, but for 2 molars sticking through the cheeks. But it was unmistakable. "Is this Paul McCartney?" Maxwell asked somberly. "Yes," we confirmed, now all crying. Well then said, "He kind of looks like a walrus, doesn't he?" Maxwell drove us to an MI5 safe house and left us in the living room, bawling while he made phone calls in the next room for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, Maxwell emerged and stated that Her Majesty's government believed that if Paul's death were made public, a rash of suicides would likely follow. Therefore, it must be kept a secret for as long as possible. We knew this to be true. Hundreds of our fans worldwide would kill themselves, making Paul's death a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. The Beatles were at the top of their creative peak. John said he had a backlog of songs he and Paul had written, as well as unfinished ideas. He believed he could complete as many as 50 songs written by Lennon and McCartney, keep the Beatles going for a long time. We had a meeting and agreed. We would not stop. We would not give up. Nobody had to know what had happened to Paul. MI5 had expert cosmetic surgeons at their disposal who could create a double from a person of close resemblance in their secret labs. But we had to swear to secrecy. Nobody had to know what had happened to Paul. MI5 had expert cosmetic surgeons at their disposal who could create a double from a person of close resemblance in their secret labs. But we had to swear to secrecy. We all agreed, and the deal was done. The next day, it was confirmed to the press that the Beatles would stop touring and work only in the recording studio. This would give us breathing space. Next, at our behest, the American teen magazine, Tiger Beat, in conjunction with Dick Clark's American Bandstand, held a Paul lookalike contest. The judges were unaware of the seriousness of their task. No winner was ever announced, but there was a winner. His name was William Campbell, and he would become the new Paul McCartney. Although it meant several operations, William Campbell was thrilled with the opportunity to actually become Beatle Paul McCartney. John recalled a book by author Stephen Crane called The Open Boat. It was a tale of 4 men trapped in a lifeboat at sea, and one dies. When the remaining 3 reached shore, they covered up the death, but wrote about it in poetry. So, John suggested we place visual clues on our album covers and write hints about Paul's accident in song lyrics.
Okay, so here's where John Lennon's symbolism really kicks off. So strap in, because it's like a lot. There is literally so much symbolism and meaning behind every single album cover, and every single one is broken down in the full-length version of this on YouTube. But I'm going to show you the ones that stood out like the most.
For the Nowhere Man single cover, we had Paul look in a different direction than the real Beatles, and you can see his right eye swollen from cosmetic surgery. William emerged from a second facial surgery with face swollen and sporting new scars. So for the album cover, a band photograph was deemed too risky. Paul is the only Beatle facing away, symbolizing his separate and showing only one eye. The way we last saw Paul on that awful night. I believe John was feeling guilty about our great deception. Now he began insisting on stronger clues for the album cover. So he used bloody meat and baby doll parts to represent the horrific nature of Paul's accident. John placed 2 decapitated dolls on Paul's shoulders, pointing toward his head, a reference to Paul's decapitation. On Paul's right arm, he placed Paul's teeth, knocked out by the car crash, and John told Paul not to smile since his teeth were on his arm. I am holding a baby doll head next to Paul's head, complete with burnt-off hair and no teeth. This cover photo was submitted to Capitol Records. The very next day, John burst into the studio screaming, "That wanker Maxwell showed up at me flat this morning with one of his bloody goons. He punched me in my side and put me in a headlock, and Maxwell said he'd snap off me head, and I'd look just like Paul if we don't change the album cover." A new photo shoot was hastily arranged later that day. This time we put Paul inside a trunk, representing a casket. In fact, when the cover is turned on its side, Paul appears to be lying in a coffin. I also remember a scar could be seen on Paul's upper lip from plastic surgery. I suggested to John that we use the song names as clues to Paul's death, and he loved the idea. Drive My Car was what Paul was doing when he was killed. I'm Only Sleeping is what Paul looked like dead. Dr. Robert was the plastic surgeon who turned William Campbell into Paul. Yesterday was about John's sorrow. Act naturally is what we all tried to do so Paul could pass as Paul. Finally, we can work it out. It was about our decision not to give up. Ian had been gone for over a year. It was clearly affecting him. Thus, John named our next album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. John designed the front cover as a funeral scene. The foreground is a freshly dug piece of earth, complete with floral decoration and a bass drum gravestone facing the grave. The crowd was made up of the people that Paul would have wanted at his funeral. John even went a step further. Every member attending was dead, had a near-death experience, or had portrayed death. Another clue started with the word ear in the bass drum. Just under that, Paul's rugby trophy served as the letter I, spelling lies, while the arrangement of yellow flowers spelled Paul. Here lies Paul. On the far right, John placed a doll, and on her lap was a model of the white Austin Healey Paul was driving when he had the fatal crash. The doll was placed in the lap of a deathly-looking shrouded figure to represent the angel of death, who wore a blood-stained driver's glove in his left hand. Just above the B, John placed another doll, but split the head open to symbolize Paul's head injury. The priest's open hand was again above Paul's head, but this time it belonged to Stephen Crane, author of The Open Boat, that helped inspire us to pull off the cover-up. John, Ringo and I posed for the photo, but for Paul, a cardboard cutout was used, propped up by the rest of us, just like in real life. Next to Diana Dawes, John placed a mirror image of a walrus to illustrate Paul's final state of being. On the back cover, we faced Paul away to again symbolize he was not a real Beatle. In the title track, the line about Billy Shears is a play on words.
So, not only did John Lennon put clues in literally every single album cover, he even went on to put clues in their songs. Like, for real.
In the title track, the line about Billy Shears is a play on words. Let me introduce you to the one and only Billy Shears. We're introducing William here.
I also need to point out he planted that picture right here inside an album cover.
Let me introduce you to the one and only Billy Shears. We're introducing William. Billy's here. On the reprise, John reveals the truth about Foal's disguise, using backwards masking. It was a fake mustache. Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock as the day began, when I caught a glimpse of Rita, the news was rather sad. He blew his mind out in a car. He didn't notice that the lights had changed. A crowd of people stood and stared. They'd seen his face before. Nobody was really sure if he was from the House of Lords. Nothing to do to save his life. You are on your own. You are in the street. Never glimpsed the truth. If they only knew. We were talking about the love that's gone so cold. And the people who came in the world lose their soul. Life flows on within you and without you. At the very end of the song, John says, I buried Paul. In Blue Jay Way, Paul is depicted trapped in the burning car. Please don't be long, for I may be asleep. On the reverse is a reference that Paul was going to the gods. He said, get me out.
Okay, I warned you it was going to be a lot. And can you imagine that this is actually just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the amount of symbolism? John Lennon was a mastermind, to say the least. Not only in music, but in art and symbolism as well. And you know what? I feel like there is just way too much for this to be a coincidence. After all of that, I literally just cannot believe that this is Paul McCartney anymore. It's not him, and I will die on this hill. What do you think?